The first sign something was wrong wasn't the late nights at the office or the sudden business trips. It wasn't even the new cologne that clung to his shirts, a scent I'd never purchased. No, it was the numbers that betrayed him. Numbers don't lie, even when husbands do. Another withdrawal? I muttered to myself, staring at our joint account statement. $5,000 gone, the third such withdrawal this month. Daniel had always been careful with money, meticulous even, which made these financial hemorrhages all the more suspicious. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I sipped my coffee in our sun-drenched kitchen, the marble countertops gleaming under the morning light. Everything in our Victorian brownstone in Boston's Beacon Hill neighborhood spoke of success. Carefully selected artwork, imported furniture, the renovated chef's kitchen Daniel had insisted we needed. 15 years of marriage and a decade of careful investing had built this life. I'd met Daniel Mercer when we were both starting out. Me with my financial planning certificate fresh in hand, him with an MBA and ambitions to revolutionize supply chain management for small businesses. We were the perfect match. I understood the value of patient capital growth, and he understood business operations. Together, we'd built Merck Logistics from a two-person consultancy to a regional powerhouse with 50 employees and contracts across New England. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. Late meeting tonight. Don't wait up. Of course. Another late meeting. The third this week. Emma? Called a voice from the doorway. My assistant Vivian stood there, tablet in hand, her practical pantsuit a contrast to my more relaxed work-from-home attire. One of the perks of being a financial consultant with a primarily digital client base was setting my own hours and workspace. Morning, Viv. Ready for the Peterson portfolio review? I asked, sliding the bank statement into a folder marked Personal. All set. But there's something else. Burke and Halden's quarterly reports came in. Their supply chain management contract is up for renewal next month. She hesitated, then added, Daniel's company is listed as their provider. I nodded, feeling a twinge of pride despite my suspicions. Merck Logistics was Daniel's baby, though I'd been instrumental in its growth. Not just as emotional support, but as the financial architect who'd structured its funding, optimized its tax strategy, and managed its investment portfolio. And, of course, as the investor who'd put up 60% of the initial capital from my inheritance when Daniel's loan applications kept getting rejected. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Good. Flag that for review next week, I replied, already planning to dive deeper. Anything else? Just that Marcus Townsend called, asked if you'd reconsider joining their board. Said, and I quote, Emma Mercer is wasted playing second fiddle to her husband's company when she could be shaping financial policy for half the corporations in Boston. I smiled despite myself. Marcus had been trying to poach me for years, first as an employee, then as a partner, and now as a board member at his investment firm. Tell him I'm still happily independent, I said, though the words felt hollow as they left my mouth. Independent. Was I really, or just willfully blind? After Vivian left, I made a decision. Opening my laptop, I logged into our household management system, a comprehensive digital tool tracking everything from investment accounts to electricity usage. Daniel had mocked it initially. Who needs a dashboard for their life? But had quickly appreciated the streamlined access to our financial information. Except recently, he'd stopped checking it. And now I understood why. It wasn't just the withdrawals from our joint account. There were unexplained credit card charges, a weekend at the Mandarin Oriental downtown when he'd claimed to be at a conference in Chicago, dinner for two at Menton, one of Boston's most expensive restaurants, a charge from Tiffany & Co. for $4,200. My stomach clenched. Our anniversary wasn't for months, and my birthday had passed without any blue box in sight. The last withdrawal had occurred yesterday, $15,000. Combined with the earlier ones, that was $30,000 drained in under a month. Not enough to bankrupt us, but enough to sting. Enough to show contempt for our partnership. Computer forensics? I murmured, opening a new browser tab. If Daniel was being this careless with our joint finances, what was happening with Merck Logistics? The company had been profitable for years, with solid growth and a strong reputation. I called my friend Teresa, who headed cybersecurity for a major bank. "I need to check my husband's email without leaving a trace," I said when she answered, skipping the pleasantries. A long pause. "Emma, that's not like you. Is everything okay?" "No," I admitted. "But I need to know exactly how not okay before I decide what to do," Teresa sighed. "I can't help you hack your husband's email. That's literally my job to prevent. But," she hesitated, "if you have legitimate access to his accounts as a business partner or through shared devices, I can tell you how to search without leaving digital footprints." 30 minutes later, armed with Teresa's technical advice and the password to Daniel's laptop, his mother's maiden name plus her birth year, he'd never been creative with security, I sat at his desk in our home office. I told myself this was justified, not just as his wife, but as an investor in his company, as someone whose financial future was entangled with his. I told myself this even as my hands shook slightly, hovering over the keyboard. Daniel's emails loaded on the screen. I started with his personal Gmail account, which was still logged in. There, buried under promotional emails and newsletters, was a conversation thread with Natalie S. The messages started professionally enough, discussing marketing strategy and client acquisition, before devolving into something far more intimate. "Miss you already. Last night was incredible. Can't wait for Nantucket this weekend." My throat tightened. Nantucket? Daniel had mentioned a business retreat on the Cape, not a romantic getaway on the island. I dug deeper, following Teresa's instructions to search without triggering red receipts or leaving digital footprints. In his work email, I found conversations. With his CFO, Michael, that made my blood run cold. Need another $50K transferred to the expansion account. Emma doesn't need to know. She's too conservative with growth projections anyway. "We'll replace it before the quarterly review," and Michael's response. "That's the third transfer this quarter, Dan. I know she's your wife, but she's also an investor. We have responsibilities." Daniel again. "Just do it, Mike. I'm CEO for a reason. The Boston Modern Hotel project is going to change everything for us." I frowned. "What Boston Modern Hotel project?" Merck Logistics was a supply chain management company, not a real estate developer or hotel operator. I switched to the company's cloud drive, where I still maintained admin access as the company's financial advisor. There, in a folder marked BMH Project, I found my answer. Daniel wasn't just having an affair. He was funding a new business venture with his mistress, a boutique hotel she was developing. Natalie Santiago, according to the business plan, was an experienced hospitality entrepreneur looking to create Boston's most exclusive luxury boutique hotel experience. And my husband was bankrolling it, not just with our personal savings, but with funds diverted from Merck Logistics. I checked the project timeline. They'd been working on this for 8 months. 8 months of late nights and business trips. 8 months of lies. I downloaded everything to an encrypted external drive, following Teresa's instructions to cover my tracks. Then I closed the laptop, exactly as I'd found it, and retreated to my home office. My hands were steady now, my mind clear with cold fury. This wasn't just infidelity. This was financial betrayal on multiple fronts. Personal and professional. Emotional and fiscal. I pulled up the Merck Logistics Incorporation documents and ownership structure, documents I'd helped create and file. While Daniel was CEO and the face of the company, the actual ownership was more complicated. I owned 30% outright as an initial investor. Daniel owned 40%. The remaining 30% was held by Mercer Family Holdings, a trust I'd established for tax purposes early in the company's existence. As trustees, Daniel and I each controlled half of those shares, another 15% each. In total, I controlled 45% to Daniel's 55%. Except, there was a provision I'd insisted on, one that Daniel had accepted without much thought, believing it would never be relevant. In the event of significant financial malfeasance by either partner, their control of the trust shares would automatically transfer to the other spouse. If I could prove Daniel was embezzling company funds, and the evidence on my encrypted drive suggested exactly that, his effective control would drop to 40%, while mine would rise to 60%. The majority shareholder. I opened our safe and retrieved our marriage certificate, property deeds, and the original Merck Logistics shareholder agreements. Then I called Marcus Townsend. "I'm reconsidering your board position offer," I said when he answered. "Emma, that's wonderful news." "But first," I interrupted, "I need the name of the best corporate attorney in your network. Someone discreet, ruthless, and available immediately." Marcus didn't even hesitate. "Sophia Lynn at Blackwood and Pierce. Handled 3 corporate divorces last year alone, both the business and marital kind. Want me to call her?" "Please," I said, already mentally cataloging what I'd need. Financial. Records. Evidence of the transfers. Documentation of Daniel's deception, both personal and professional. I ended the call and stared out the window at the Boston skyline. The city looked the same as it had this morning, but everything had changed. My marriage, my company, my future. My phone buzzed with Daniel's evening check-in text, "Meeting running late. Don't wait up." I smiled grimly and typed back, "No problem. Take your time. I've got plenty to keep me busy." If he detected any difference in my tone, he didn't. Show it. Why would he? Daniel had grown accustomed to my supportiveness, my patience, my trust. He'd taken those qualities and weaponized them against me, using my faith in our partnership as cover for his betrayal. That faith was gone now, burned, away by the evidence on my encrypted drive. In its place was something colder and more calculating, a determination to protect what was mine and make Daniel understand exactly who he'd underestimated. The next morning, I dressed with particular care. A charcoal Armani suit I reserved for important client meetings, pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandmother, subtle makeup that highlighted my features without appearing obvious. Armor, in its way. "You look nice," Daniel commented over breakfast, barely glancing up from his phone. "Big client meeting?" "Something like that," I replied, watching him over the rim of my coffee cup. "How was your meeting last night?" "Productive. We're close to landing that pharmaceutical client I mentioned." Another lie. There was no pharmaceutical client, at least not according to the records I'd reviewed. Just more money being funneled to the Boston Modern Hotel project. "Great," I said mildly. "Oh, by the way, Marcus Townsend called again about that board position." Daniel's head snapped up, his attention finally captured. "You're not considering it, are you? We talked about this. Your consulting work is flexible, lets you set your own hours. A board commitment would change everything." Translation: a board position would make me less available to manage our household, less willing to accept his increasingly frequent absences without question. "Just keeping options open," I said with a shrug. "Speaking of which, I was thinking of joining you at the office today. It's been a while since I've checked in on the investment portfolio performance." A flicker of panic crossed his face before he smoothed it away. "Today's not great. Back-to-back meetings. Maybe next week?" "I won't get in your way," I assured him. "I can use the small conference room, unless there's some reason you don't want me there?" Daniel forced a smile. "Of course not. You're always welcome. You know that." I watched him retreat upstairs to finish dressing, noting the tension in his shoulders, the slightly too casual way he'd dismissed my suggestion. He was worried, but trying not to show it. While he showered, I texted Sophia Lynn, the attorney Marcus had connected me with yesterday. We'd already spoken for an hour the previous evening, outlining my suspicions and the evidence I'd gathered. Heading to Merck Logistics. Office today. Will secure additional documentation as discussed. Her response came moments later. Perfect. Remember, don't confront yet. Information gathering phase only. Meeting still set for 2 p.m. at my office. I slipped my phone into my purse just as Daniel came downstairs, adjusting his tie, a Hermes piece I'd given him for Christmas. Ready to go? I asked, dangling my car keys. We can take my car if you'd like. Daniel hesitated, visibly calculating his options. Refusing would seem suspicious, but accepting meant surrendering control of his schedule, potentially interfering with whatever plans he'd made with Natalie. Sure, he said finally. That would be nice. It's been a while since we commuted together. The drive to Merck Logistics' downtown office was filled with carefully neutral conversation, discussion of a neighbor's landscaping project, speculation about an upcoming election, commentary on a podcast we'd both listened to. The polite chit-chat of strangers who happened to share a living space. Had we always been this superficial, or was it just more noticeable now that I was paying attention? The Merck Logistics office occupied the 15th floor of a glass tower with views of Boston Harbor. As we stepped off the elevator, several employees greeted us with varying degrees of surprise at seeing me. Mrs. Mercer, it's been too long, said Rhonda, the office manager who'd been with the company almost since the beginning. Just dropping in to check on some things, I explained with a warm smile. Don't mind me. Daniel made a show of checking his watch. I've got that conference call in 5 minutes. You okay getting settled in the small conference room? Absolutely, I assured him. Take your time. I've got plenty to keep me busy. As soon as Daniel disappeared into his office, I made my way to the finance department. Michael Chen, the CFO who'd expressed reservations about Daniel's fund transfers, looked up from his computer with surprise. Emma, this is unexpected. Just doing a routine check on our investment portfolio performance, I said casually, taking a seat across from his desk. Year-end tax planning, you know how it is. Michael nodded, though a flicker of unease crossed his face. Of course. What did you need? Full access to the financial systems would be ideal. I want to run some projections based on current performance. I can pull those reports for you. That's kind, Michael, but unnecessary. I'm familiar with the systems, and I'd rather not take you away from your work. My tone remained pleasant but firm. Unless there's some reason you don't want me accessing the financial data directly? His discomfort was palpable now. No, of course not. It's just what? I prompted when he didn't continue. Michael sighed, glancing toward Daniel's office. Nothing. Let me set you up in the conference room. 15 minutes later, I was logged into Merck Logistics' financial systems with full administrative access. What I found confirmed my worst suspicions and revealed new depths to Daniel's betrayal. The expansion account Daniel had referenced wasn't for company growth at all. It was a slush fund he'd been building for months, siphoning money from various company projects and padding vendor contracts. All told, nearly $400,000 had been diverted, not just to Natalie's hotel project, but to funding a lavish lifestyle Daniel had been keeping separate from our marriage. There were payments for a luxury apartment in the Seaport District, presumably where he met Natalie when not at hotels. Private jet rentals for business trips that never appeared in the company's travel records. Expensive dinners, jewelry, weekend getaways. My husband wasn't just having an affair. He was living a double life, funded by our personal savings and company resources. I documented everything meticulously, saving records to my encrypted drive and sending select files to Sophia Lynn via secure transfer. By noon, I had compiled a damning catalog of financial impropriety and breach of fiduciary duty. As I worked, I maintained a friendly facade with everyone who passed the conference room, accepting coffee from the office manager and chatting briefly with the marketing director about her new baby. No one would have guessed that beneath my professional demeanor, I was systematically dismantling the foundation of my marriage and preparing to assume control of the company my husband thought was his alone. At 1:30, I packed up my materials and texted Daniel, heading out to meet a client. "Thanks for letting me use the space today. See you at home tonight." His reply was immediate. "Already?" I was hoping we could grab lunch. Too little. Too late. Rain check? This meeting's been on the books for weeks. "Of course," he replied. "Love you." Stared at those two words, remembering how they used to make me feel. Safe. Valued. Cherished. Now they were just another tactical move in whatever game Daniel thought he was playing. I didn't bother responding. Instead, I slipped out of the office and headed to my meeting with Sophia Lynn, armed with everything I needed to take back control of my life, my finances, and the company I'd helped build. As I drove across town, a notification popped up on my phone. A charge alert from our joint credit card. Daniel had just spent $809 at an upscale restaurant near the Seaport District. Lunch for two, no doubt. At least now I knew exactly who he was dining with, and exactly what he was paying for it with. My money. My company's resources. My trust. Well, the free lunch was about to end, in more ways than one. Daniel had forgotten one crucial detail while setting up his double life. I wasn't just his wife. I was the financial architect who had structured every aspect of his success, and I was about to demonstrate exactly what that meant. Sophia Lynn's office at Blackwood and Pierce occupied the 32nd floor of a gleaming downtown tower with sweeping views of Boston Harbor. The reception area spoke of discreet wealth and power, understated furnishings in muted grays and blues, abstract artwork that probably cost more than most people's cars, and an air of hushed efficiency. "Mrs. Mercer," the receptionist greeted me. "Ms. Lynn is expecting you. Please follow me." Sophia Lynn was everything Marcus had promised. Sharp, polished, and radiating a quiet intensity that immediately put me at ease. In her mid-40s with an impeccable bob and a charcoal suit that rivaled my own, she rose from behind an imposing desk as I entered. "Emma," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming. I've reviewed the materials you sent over." Her office was a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows, but she'd positioned her desk to face the door rather than the view, as if the easy panorama of Boston's skyline was less interesting than whoever might walk through her door. "And?" I asked, taking the seat she offered. "And your husband has made a series of catastrophic mistakes, both personally and professionally." Sophia gestured to the spread of documents on her desk. "The evidence of financial malfeasance is clear. The question now is how you want to proceed." I took a deep breath. "I want to protect what's mine. The company I helped build. The future I've planned for, and I want Daniel to understand exactly what his betrayal has cost him." Sophia nodded, not a flicker of judgment crossing her face. "Then let's get to work. Based on the documentation you've provided and the company bylaws, we have several options." For the next hour, we mapped out a strategy so comprehensive it left no aspect of Daniel's betrayal unaddressed. Sophia brought in members of her team, a forensic accountant, a corporate governance specialist, and a divorce attorney, each adding layers to our plan. "The key," Sophia explained, "is timing. We need to secure the company before confronting the personal issues. Otherwise, Daniel might try to use Merck Logistics resources to fight you." "He already is," I pointed out. "That's what the withdrawals from our joint account are funding, his legal protection." "Then we move quickly," Sophia decided. starting with securing your control of the company shares. The process was surprisingly straightforward. The trustee for Mercer Family Holdings was Marcus Townsend's firm, a deliberate choice I'd made. Years ago, though Daniel had never questioned it. With the evidence of embezzlement I'd gathered, the transfer of voting rights was activated with a single phone call and some paperwork. By 5 o'clock it was done. I officially controlled 60% of Merck Logistics. The board meeting is scheduled for Monday, Sophia confirmed, checking her calendar. That gives us 3 days to prepare the full presentation and notify all members. Daniel will fight this, I said, not a question but a statement of fact. Of course he will, Sophia agreed. But with the evidence we have, combined with your now majority shareholder status, his options are limited. The real question is what you want to happen after you win. I considered this carefully. Despite everything, I didn't want to destroy Merck Logistics. It was as much my creation as Daniel's, and 50 people depended on it for their livelihoods. I want the company to survive and thrive, I said finally. Whether that's with me taking a more active leadership role or bringing in new management depends on how this plays out. Sophia nodded approvingly. That's smart. Keep your options open until you see how Daniel responds. As I gathered my things to leave, Sophia asked the question I'd been avoiding. And personally? What do you want from the marriage? The answer came with surprising clarity. Nothing. That part of my life is over. I just need to make the ending as advantageous as possible. Driving home, I felt strangely calm. The initial shock and hurt had crystallized into something harder and more purposeful. Daniel had made a choice, multiple choices, that had shattered our marriage. Now I was making mine. My phone rang through the car's Bluetooth system. Daniel. Hey. I answered, my voice perfectly normal. On your way home? Actually, something's come up with the Chicago client. I need to fly out tonight. Another lie. There was no Chicago client. Based on the records I'd seen, he was planning a weekend at the Boston Modern Hotel site with Natalie. That's too bad, I said, infusing my voice with just the right amount of disappointment. I was thinking we could try that new restaurant in the South End. Rain check? He asked, the relief in his voice almost palpable. I'll make it up to you next week. Of course, I agreed. Do you need me to pack anything for you? No, I've got my emergency bag at the office. I'll just grab a lift to the airport from here. Safe travels then. Love you. The words tasted like ash in my mouth, but I said them anyway. 3 more days of pretense? Then never again. Love you too, Daniel replied automatically. I'll call you when I land. The call ended, and I allowed myself a grim smile. Daniel wouldn't be flying anywhere tonight. He'd be driving to the Seaport District to spend the weekend with Natalie. In the apartment he'd leased with company money, planning their hotel venture, blissfully unaware that his world was about to implode. When I arrived home, the house felt different. Not because anything had changed physically, but because I was seeing it through new eyes. The artwork we'd chosen together, the kitchen renovation Daniel had insisted on, the photographs from vacations, and celebrations that lined the hallway. 15 years of shared history, now revealed as partly fiction. I poured myself a glass of wine, an excellent Cabernet from the collection Daniel prided himself on, and carried it upstairs to my home office. There, spread across my desk, I laid out printed copies of the key evidence. Bank statements showing the systematic draining of our savings, company financial records documenting the diverted funds, emails between Daniel and Natalie discussing both their affair and their business plans. It was all so calculating, so deliberate. This wasn't a momentary lapse or a midlife crisis. This was a sustained campaign of deception designed to fund a new life with a new partner using resources built through our partnership. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. Additional documentation from Marcus secured. Transfer of voting rights officially registered. You are now majority shareholder of Merck Logistics. I stared at those words, feeling their weight. Majority shareholder. The company Daniel thought was his was now, officially and legally, under my control. Another text followed. Recommend no contact. With D until Monday meeting. Everything is in place. Get some rest this weekend. Rest seemed unlikely, but I appreciated the sentiment. I texted back a simple acknowledgement, then returned to my review of the evidence. Something caught my eye, a recurring calendar entry in Daniel's schedule that I hadn't noticed before. BMH Project Review appeared weekly, always at times when I'd be with clients or otherwise occupied. Clicking through to the details, I found the address, a coffee shop in Cambridge, far from our usual haunts. On impulse, I checked the calendar. The next meeting was scheduled for tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Daniel would expect me to be conducting my regular Friday client calls from my home office, safely out of the way. I shouldn't go. Sophia had recommended no contact. Confronting Daniel and Natalie before the board meeting could tip our hand, give Daniel time to prepare counter-arguments or destroy evidence. But something in me needed to see them together. Needed to witness with my own eyes what my husband had chosen over our marriage and shared business. I made a decision. I would go, but not to confront, just to observe. To see the truth with my own eyes before I acted on it. The next morning, I dressed casually but carefully. Jeans, a simple sweater, sunglasses, and a baseball cap borrowed from the back of our coat closet. Nothing like my usual polished professional look. Just another Cambridge coffee shop patron. I arrived 20 minutes early, selecting a corner table partially obscured by a decorative plant, but with a clear view of the entrance. I ordered a latte and opened my laptop, the picture of a casual remote worker in a city full of them. At precisely 9:58, Natalie Santiago walked in. She was younger than I'd expected, mid-30s at most, with a confident stride and the polished look of someone who had cultivated a personal brand. Her dark hair fell in a sleek curtain to her shoulders, and her tailored blazer over designer jeans suggested casual sophistication. She ordered at the counter, then selected a table by the window, spreading out architectural renderings and what looked like financial projections. Waiting for Daniel, preparing to present their progress on the hotel project he was secretly funding with our money. Daniel arrived at 10:05, apologizing for his lateness as he bent to kiss her cheek with the easy familiarity of an established relationship. I felt a strange detachment watching them, as if I were observing characters in a film rather than my husband and his mistress. I've adjusted the projections based on the new contractor estimates, Natalie was saying, sliding papers toward Daniel. We're still on track for the June groundbreaking if the permit process goes smoothly. It will, Daniel assured her with the confident smile I knew so well. I've got a connection at the planning office who can expedite things. They bent their heads together over the plans, the picture of business partners and lovers building. A shared dream. With our money. With Merck Logistics funds. I watched for nearly an hour, not moving from my corner, nursing my cold coffee. They discussed construction timelines, design elements, marketing strategies, all the details of the Boston Modern Hotel project that had been deemed worthy of diverting company resources and destroying a marriage. When are you going to tell her? Natalie asked eventually, her voice just audible from my position. We're running out of excuses for these transfers. Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. After the groundbreaking, once construction is underway, the investment will be too significant to unwind. She'll have to accept it as a fait accompli. And if she doesn't? Natalie pressed. Daniel's smile was coldly confident. Emma's always been risk-averse, too cautious. That's why I've had to work around her. But once she sees the potential return, she'll come around. She always does. I nearly laughed out loud at his profound misreading of my character. Risk-averse? No. Careful, yes. Strategic, absolutely. But I had taken the biggest risk of all, investing in him, in us, in our shared future. and he had proven himself unworthy of that investment. Besides, Daniel continued, reaching for Natalie's hand across the table, by then we'll be in a position to restructure the company. Create a hospitality division with you at the helm. Emma can keep managing the investment portfolio. That's what she's good at. She'll never have to know about us. The audacity was breathtaking. He wasn't planning to leave me. He was planning to incorporate his mistress into our company, to have us both working for his benefit, neither fully aware of the other's role. I'd seen enough. Carefully packing my laptop, I slipped out of the coffee shop without either of them noticing, my mind oddly clear despite the additional betrayal I'd just witnessed. Back in my car, I called Sophia. I need you to look into something else, I said without preamble. Daniel has apparently been promising Natalie Santiago a position running a new hospitality division at Merck Logistics once the hotel project is underway. Sophia didn't ask how. I knew this. Another point in her favor. I'll add it to our documentation. This actually strengthens our case for his removal. He's been making executive hiring commitments without board approval. There's more, I continued. He specifically mentioned having connections at the planning office who could expedite permits. Given everything else, I'm concerned about potential bribery or improper influence. I'll have my team look into it, Sophia promised. This could escalate beyond civil concerns if he's been offering kickbacks to public officials. After ending the call, I sat in my car, watching the coffee shop entrance. Eventually, Daniel and Natalie emerged, sharing a lingering kiss before heading in opposite directions. She toward the Seaport District, he back toward the Merck Logistics office. Followed Daniel at a discreet distance, curious where he would go next. Instead of returning to the office as he'd indicated, he drove to a high-end jewelry store in Copley Place. Through the window, I watched him select something from a display case, a bracelet or necklace, I couldn't quite tell, and pay with. What I was certain was our joint credit card, another gift for Natalie, no doubt. Another piece of my financial security transformed into a token of his affection for another woman. The final piece of my hesitation dissolved. Daniel deserved everything. That was coming to him. I drove to Sophia's office where her team was preparing for Monday's board meeting. The corporate governance specialist, Janet, looked up as I entered the conference room. Perfect timing, she said. We were just reviewing the planned sequence of events for Monday. On the conference room wall, a detailed timeline showed each phase of what was about to unfold. It was comprehensive, meticulous, and utterly devastating to Daniel's position. I want to add something, I said, describing what I'd witnessed at the coffee shop. He's not just funding her hotel project, he's promising her a position at Merck Logistics. Janet made notes rapidly. This is significant. It demonstrates that the financial impropriety isn't a one-time diversion of funds, but part of a systematic plan to restructure company operations without board oversight. It also speaks to his judgment, added Sophia, who had joined us from her office. He's making executive hiring decisions based on personal relationships rather than qualifications or company needs. For the rest of the afternoon, we refined the strategy for Monday's confrontation, anticipating Daniel's potential defenses and preparing counterarguments for each. By evening, the plan was watertight. What will you do this weekend? Sophia asked as we wrapped up. It's important you don't tip him off before Monday. Daniel's Chicago trip gives me some space, I replied. He won't be home until Sunday evening. By then, everything will be in place. Sophia nodded approvingly. Perfect. Get some rest. Monday will be intense. As I drove home through the gathering darkness, I reflected on how quickly life could change. A week ago, I'd been going about my business suspecting minor financial improprieties, but nothing on this scale. Now I was preparing to take control of a company and end a marriage in one decisive move. The house was silent when I arrived home, Daniel's absence creating a peculiar limbo. The last weekend of a life that was already over, but hadn't yet been officially ended. I poured myself a glass of wine and carried it upstairs to our bedroom. Opening Daniel's closet, I ran my fingers over the suits I'd helped him select, the ties I'd gifted him on special occasions, the shoes he polished every Sunday evening while watching sports. Soon, these would be packed away, removed from my space. Soon, the pretense would end. My phone rang, Daniel checking in, maintaining the fiction of his business trip to Chicago. "Hey," I answered, infusing my voice with just the right amount of casual warmth. "How was your flight?" "Uneventful," he lied smoothly. "Just got to the hotel. How's your evening going?" "Quiet," I replied, which was at least true. "Just catching up on some reading." "Well, don't wait up for me Sunday. My flight doesn't get in until late." Of course it didn't. Because there was no flight. There was just Daniel, spending the weekend with his mistress in the apartment he'd leased with company funds, planning their future with money diverted from our shared resources. "I won't," I promised. "Sleep well." After we hung up, I returned to his closet, this time with more purposeful movements. At the back, behind his winter coats, was the small safe where Daniel kept his personal documents: passport, birth certificate, social security card, documents he might grab quickly if he was planning to run. The combination was his mother's birthday. Daniel had always been sentimental but predictable with passwords. Inside, besides the expected documents, I found a USB drive labeled BMH backup and a small jewelry box. Curiosity piqued, I connected the USB drive to my laptop. It contained all the Boston Modern Hotel project files, architectural plans, financial projections, marketing strategies. And something else, a folder labeled Exit Strategy. Inside were documents outlining how to transfer Merck Logistics assets to a new company structure, one where Daniel would have complete control. There were drafts of company announcements about my decision to step back from day-to-day operations to focus on personal investments. There were even talking points for how Daniel would position my departure to clients and employees. He wasn't just having an affair and diverting company funds. He was planning to ease me out of the business entirely, to rewrite my role in building Merck Logistics until I became a footnote in its history. With trembling fingers, I opened the small jewelry box. Inside was not a gift intended for Natalie, but something far more disturbing. My grandmother's sapphire ring, the one I kept in my jewelry box and wore only on special occasions. The one with significant sentimental and monetary value. Daniel had taken it, presumably to either sell or give to Natalie after having it reset. The violation of this theft felt different somehow. More personal than the financial deceptions, more deliberately cruel. I returned everything to the safe except the ring, which I put back in my own jewelry box. Then I called Sophia. "There's been a development," I said when she answered. "Daniel has detailed plans to push me out of Merck Logistics entirely, and he's been taking my personal jewelry." "Document everything," Sophia instructed. "Take photos of the safe contents. Copy the USB drive. We'll add it to Monday's presentation." After following her instructions, I sat on the edge of our bed, the bed Daniel would never sleep in again after Sunday night, and felt a strange sense of calm descend. The last piece of uncertainty had been removed. The final question about whether there might be some explanation, some way to salvage anything from the wreckage of our marriage, had been answered definitively. Daniel had chosen his path, had been choosing it deliberately and methodically for months, and on Monday, he would discover the consequences of those choices. Sunday crawled by with excruciating slowness. I spent the day finalizing preparations for Monday's confrontation, carefully maintaining the illusion that everything was normal. I answered Daniel's occasional text messages with appropriate wifely concern about his fictional business meetings. I arranged fresh flowers in the living room. I even prepared his favorite lasagna for dinner, as if expecting his return from a legitimate business trip. All the while, Sophia's team was setting the final pieces in place. "The board members have all confirmed attendance," Vivian reported, during our secure conference call. After learning the full extent of Daniel's deception, she had become my most trusted ally. Michael Chen has the financial presentation ready and has secured all relevant records so they can't be altered. What about security? I asked, remembering Daniel's temper. While he'd never been physically violent, I'd seen him throw objects when particularly frustrated with business setbacks. Handled, Sophia confirmed. We've retained private security for the meeting itself. Additionally, all of Daniel's access credentials will be suspended the moment the board votes to remove him. Everything from his office keycard to his email account. And the Boston Modern Hotel project, I asked. Our real estate specialist has been reviewing the documentation, Sophia said. It's actually a viable concept with solid market research. The problem isn't the project itself, but how Daniel has been funding it. I nodded, unsurprised. Daniel had always had good business instincts. It was his ethics that had proven deficient. I want options for the project, I decided. Either to divest completely or to bring it under legitimate Merck Logistics control. We shouldn't lose a good opportunity just because it was improperly initiated. Sophia made a note. I'll have proposals. Ready for both scenarios. As evening approached, I received a text from Daniel. Flight delayed. Should land around 10 p.m. Don't wait up. I almost laughed at the ongoing charade. Flight tracking apps showed no delays for any flights from Chicago to Boston that evening. Not that Daniel was on any of them anyway. He was likely extending his weekend with Natalie, perhaps celebrating their hotel project, blissfully unaware of what waited for him tomorrow. Drive safe when you get in. Lasagna in the fridge if you're hungry, I texted back, playing my role one last time. At 11:32 p.m., I heard Daniel's key in the lock. From my position in the darkened home office, door cracked just enough to see the foyer. I watched him enter, wheeling a small carry-on bag as if returning from his fictional Chicago trip. He checked his appearance in the entryway mirror, straightening his tie and smoothing his hair before heading to the kitchen. I heard the refrigerator open, the clink of a plate, the microwave hum. Domestic sounds from a man who had spent the weekend in another woman's bed before returning to the comforts of the home I maintained. When he'd finished eating, Daniel came upstairs, pausing outside our bedroom door. I held my breath, wondering if he would notice the light in my office. But he merely entered the bedroom, and soon I heard the shower running. I remained in the office, reviewing the presentation for tomorrow one final time, until I was certain Daniel was asleep. Only then did I slip into the guest bedroom where I'd already placed essentials for the morning. I had no intention of sleeping beside him ever again. Monday morning arrived with a clarity that matched my resolve. I dressed for battle in a precisely tailored charcoal suit, pearl earrings, and subtle makeup that highlighted my features without appearing obvious. By the time I emerged, Daniel was in the kitchen preparing coffee, dressed in his favorite power suit, navy canali, crisp white shirt, red tie. Armor of his own, though he didn't yet know he would need it. "Good morning," he said, glancing up with a smile. "You look nice. Big client meeting?" "Something like that," I replied, accepting the coffee he offered. "How was Chicago?" "Productive." Daniel lied smoothly. "I think we've got the pharmaceutical contract locked down. Just need to finalize some details this week." I nodded, marveling at how easily the fabrications flowed from him. Had he always been this way, or had deception become second nature only recently? "I've got meetings all morning," I said casually, checking my watch, including a stop at Merck Logistics. "Around 11. Maybe we could grab lunch after?" A flicker of alarm crossed Daniel's face before he controlled it. "Today's pretty packed. Maybe tomorrow?" "Let's play it by ear," I suggested. "I might still be at the office anyway." Daniel's phone chimed with a text. He glanced at it, then quickly put the phone face down on the counter. Natalie, no doubt, unaware that her lover's carefully constructed double life was hours from collapse. "I should get going," Daniel said, draining his coffee cup. "Conference call at 8. He kissed my cheek, a perfunctory gesture, husband to wife, before grabbing his briefcase and heading for the door. I watched him go, wondering if he felt any guilt, any remorse for the systematic betrayal of our marriage and business partnership. As the door closed behind him, I picked up my phone and texted Sophia. "He's on his way. All systems go." Her response was immediate, everything in place. "See you at 10:30 for final prep." I took one last look around the kitchen, the space where we'd shared countless meals, planned our future, built our life together. Then I gathered my materials and headed out, closing the door on more than just our home. Merck Logistics headquarters hummed with normal Monday morning activity when I arrived at 10:25. The receptionist greeted me with her usual warmth. "Good morning, Mrs. Mercer," unaware of the corporate earthquake about to strike. Sophia was waiting in the small conference room we'd reserved for final preparations, along with Michael Chen and 2 members of her legal team. "Everything is proceeding as planned," she reported. "The board members are arriving now and being escorted to the main conference room. Daniel is in his office on a call with Natalie Santiago." She glanced at her tablet. "He's reassuring her that additional funds will be transferred this week." I nodded, feeling oddly detached. The woman I'd been a week ago, trusting, supportive, deliberately blind, seemed like a stranger now. "The presentation is loaded," Michael confirmed, unable to meet my eyes. His discomfort was understandable. As CFO, he'd been caught between Daniel's demands and his own ethical concerns for months. "All financial records are secured and backed up off-site." "And security?" I asked. "In position," Sophia confirmed. 2 plainclothes officers in the conference room, 2 more monitoring the executive floor. Daniel's access credentials are queued for immediate suspension pending the board vote. I took a deep breath, collecting myself for what was to come. "Then I believe we're ready." At precisely 11 a.m., I entered the main conference room, Sophia and Michael flanking me. The board members were already seated, 7 men and women who oversaw Merck Logistics governance, all wearing expressions of concern and confusion. Eleanor Winters, the board chair, rose to greet me. "Emma, this is unexpected. We were told this was an emergency meeting, but not what it concerned." "I apologize for the mystery," I replied, shaking her hand. "But the circumstances required discretion. Is everyone here?" "Everyone except Daniel," Eleanor confirmed. "His assistant says he's wrapping up a call and will join us shortly." On cue, Daniel strode into the room, confidence personified, until he saw me standing at the head of the table, Sophia beside me. He faltered for just a moment before recovering his composure. "Emma, I didn't realize you'd be joining us." His smile didn't reach his eyes as he assessed the situation. "What's this about, Eleanor?" "That's what we're all waiting to find out," Eleanor replied, gesturing for him to take a seat. Daniel remained standing. "Actually, if this is a formal board meeting, I should be chairing it as CEO." "This meeting was called by majority shareholder request," Sophia interjected smoothly. "Under Article 4, Section 2 of the company bylaws, Mrs. Mercer, as the majority shareholder, has designated the agenda and presentation order." Daniel's confident expression slipped. "Majority shareholder? There must be some mistake. I hold 55% of the company shares." "Not anymore," I said quietly, sliding a document toward him. "As of Friday afternoon, your control of the Mercer Family Holdings Trust shares has been transferred to me due to documented financial malfeasance. I now control 60% of Merck Logistics voting shares." The board members exchanged alarmed glances. As Daniel stared at the document, his face draining of color. "This is ridiculous," he finally managed. "Some kind of mistake or manipulation. You can't just—" "Mr. Mercer," Sophia interrupted. "The transfer was executed in accordance with Section 7.3 of your operating agreement, which you signed in 2012. The provision explicitly states that evidence of significant financial malfeasance by either partner, triggers automatic transfer of trust voting rights to the non-offending party. Daniel looked around the table, seeking allies and finding none, only concerned and increasingly suspicious faces. "What exactly are you accusing me of?" he demanded, his voice hardening. I met his gaze steadily. "Embezzlement, misappropriation of company funds, breach of fiduciary duty. Shall I continue?" "These are serious allegations," Eleanor said, her expression grave. "What evidence do you have?" I nodded to Michael, who activated the presentation screen. "With the board's permission, we've prepared a comprehensive overview of the financial irregularities we've discovered." For the next 30 minutes, Michael methodically presented the evidence we'd compiled. Unauthorized transfers, falsified expense reports, manipulated vendor contracts, all leading to nearly $400,000 diverted from Merck Logistics to the Boston Modern Hotel project and Daniel's personal expenses with Natalie. Daniel's face cycled through expressions: shock, anger, calculation, and finally a desperate attempt at damage control. "This is a misunderstanding," he insisted when Michael finished. "Yes, I've been exploring diversification opportunities for Merck Logistics, including the hospitality sector. The Boston Modern Hotel project is a potential acquisition target that I've been evaluating. By funneling company funds through manipulated vendor contracts," I asked quietly. "By falsifying expense reports? By concealing the entire project from the board and your fellow executives?" "Sometimes exploring new opportunities requires discretion," Daniel countered, regaining some confidence, "especially in competitive markets. I was planning to present the full project to the board once the initial assessment was complete." Eleanor frowned. "That's not how we operate, Daniel. Major diversification initiatives require board approval from conception, not after funds have already been committed. And that doesn't explain why the project documentation lists Natalie Santiago as the sole owner and developer," Michael added, advancing to that slide. "Or why company funds were used to lease a private apartment in the Seaport district under her name." Daniel's jaw tightened as he realized his position was unraveling. "This is a witch hunt orchestrated by my wife because of personal issues in our marriage," he declared, playing his final card. "Emma is using her financial position to interfere with legitimate business operations because she suspects I've been unfaithful." The board members shifted uncomfortably, but I remained calm. "This isn't about infidelity, Daniel. It's about financial impropriety. It's about breach of fiduciary duty. It's about using company resources built with my investment and expertise to fund your personal relationship and your girlfriend's business venture." I nodded to Sophia, who distributed additional documentation to each board member. "What you're looking at," I explained, "is evidence that Daniel has not only been diverting company funds, but also developing plans to restructure Merck Logistics without board approval, specifically to create a hospitality division that would be headed by Natalie Santiago, with whom he has been having an extramarital affair." Daniel lunged for the documents, but security was faster, stepping between him and the board table. "You had no right to access my personal files," he shouted. "They were on the company server," Michael replied quietly. "On company equipment, backed up on company cloud storage. As CFO, I have both the right and the obligation to review suspicious financial activities and their related documentation." Eleanor studied the materials with growing concern. "Daniel, these papers suggest you've been planning to reallocate substantial company resources without board oversight or shareholder approval. There are draft announcements here about Emma stepping back from operations that she clearly knew nothing about." "This is a misrepresentation," Daniel insisted, but his argument was weakening. "Those are just exploratory scenarios, contingency planning." "Including the part where you list strategies for diluting my ownership stake?" I asked, pointing to that section. "Or where you outline how to present my departure to clients and employees?" The conference room fell silent as the full scope of Daniel's deception became clear. Not just embezzlement to fund an affair, but a coordinated plan to seize complete control of Merck Logistics and erase my role in building it. Eleanor finally broke the silence. I believe we've seen enough to take action. Under the circumstances, I move that Daniel Mercer be immediately suspended from his position as CEO pending a full investigation of these allegations. Seconded, said Jerome Phillips, the longest-serving board member. This is absurd, Daniel protested. You can't remove me. I built this company. Actually, I corrected him, we built this company. My inheritance provided the initial funding when your loan applications were rejected. My financial strategies optimized our growth. My investment portfolio sustained us through the early years. You were the operational expert, but Merck Logistics has always been a partnership, one that you violated when you started diverting funds and planning my removal. The vote was swift and unanimous. Daniel Mercer was suspended as CEO, effective immediately, pending full investigation of the financial improprieties detailed in our presentation. As security stepped forward to escort Daniel from the building, he turned to me, his expression a mix of fury and disbelief. You planned this, he accused. You set me up. No, Daniel, I replied calmly. You did this to yourself. Every unauthorized transfer, every secret meeting with Natalie, every lie about business trips while you were actually in her bed or planning. Your hotel. This is simply the consequence of choices you made, repeatedly and deliberately, for months. His face contorted with rage. This isn't over. You think you've won, but… Mr. Mercer, Sophia interrupted, I strongly advise against making threats in front of witnesses. It will only complicate your already precarious legal position. Daniel fell silent, glaring at each of us in turn before allowing security to lead him toward the door. At the threshold, he turned back for one final shot. You need me, Emma. This company needs me. You're going to regret this. The only thing I regret, I replied, meeting his gaze steadily, is trusting you with my investment, my company, and my future. That's a mistake I won't repeat. As the door closed behind him, Eleanor turned to me. What happens now, Emma? Squared my shoulders, feeling the weight of responsibility and the strange lightness of liberation simultaneously. Now we stabilize the company. Michael has already implemented enhanced financial controls to prevent further unauthorized transfers. We'll need to conduct a thorough audit to ensure we've identified all compromised accounts and projects. And leadership? Jerome asked. Merck Logistics needs a CEO. I propose we appoint Emma as interim CEO, Eleanor suggested, surprising me. She has the financial expertise, knows the company intimately, and as majority shareholder, has the most at stake in ensuring its continued success. The suggestion was met with nods around the table. These people had known me for years, had seen my contributions even when they'd been overshadowed by Daniel's more visible role. I'm willing to serve in that capacity while we determine the best long-term leadership structure, I agreed. But my priority is stabilizing operations and reassuring our clients and employees. As the meeting adjourned, Sophia drew me aside. That went as well as could be expected. Daniel will likely attempt to challenge the share transfer, but with the evidence we've compiled, his position is extremely weak. And personally, I asked, knowing that the business separation was only the first step. Divorce papers are prepared, she confirmed. Given the documented financial misconduct, including the diversion of marital assets to fund his affair, you're in an extremely strong position. We can file whenever you're ready. I nodded, suddenly exhausted as the adrenaline of confrontation began to fade. Let's secure the company first. Make sure Daniel can't access any accounts or systems. Then we'll address the personal side. As Sophia left to coordinate with her team, Michael approached hesitantly. Emma, I should have said something sooner about the transfers. I knew something wasn't right. But Daniel was insistent, and I raised a hand to stop him. You eventually did the right thing, Michael. That's what matters now. Besides, we have work to do. What about the Boston Modern Hotel project? He asked. It's actually not a bad concept, despite how it was funded. I want a complete evaluation, I decided. If it's viable, we'll consider bringing it under legitimate Merck logistics control, properly funded, properly documented, properly approved. By the board. We shouldn't lose a good opportunity just because it was improperly initiated. And Ms. Santiago? I considered this. Natalie was both victim and accomplice in Daniel's deception. Likely unaware of the company funds he was diverting, but certainly aware of his marital status. Have our attorneys review her contract and involvement. If she has valuable expertise to contribute, we can discuss proper terms. If not, we buy her out cleanly and move forward without her. Michael nodded approvingly. That's more generous than many would be in your position. This isn't about revenge, I told him, though part of me certainly wanted it. It's about protecting what we've built and moving forward responsibly. As Michael left to begin implementing our financial safeguards, I stood alone in the conference room, looking out at the Boston skyline. The city looked the same as it had this morning, but everything had changed. My marriage was over. My role at Merck Logistics was transforming. The future I had planned with Daniel was gone, replaced by something uncertain but undeniably mine to shape. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. You've made a terrible mistake. I built this company. No one will respect you as CEO. Call me when you're ready to discuss reasonable terms. I smiled grimly at his continued delusion, then deleted the message without responding. Daniel still didn't understand what had happened, that his carefully constructed world had not just been shaken, but fundamentally dismantled. He had forgotten the most basic truth of our partnership. I wasn't just his wife. I was the financial architect who had structured every aspect of his success, and now I would use that same expertise to rebuild without him. When I finally left the Merck Logistics office that evening, I didn't go home to the house Daniel and I had shared. Instead, I checked into the Four Seasons with a small overnight bag I'd prepared over the weekend, containing essentials and the few truly irreplaceable items from our home, including my grandmother's jewelry that Daniel had attempted to appropriate. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, employees to reassure, clients to update, personal belongings to retrieve. But tonight, I allowed myself a moment of quiet vindication as I sipped a glass of champagne and watched the city lights shimmer below my hotel window. Daniel had drained our savings for his girlfriend, but he had forgotten that I controlled his business shares. It was a mistake he would never have the opportunity to make again. The morning after the board meeting dawned with startling clarity. I woke in my Four Seasons suite to dozens of missed calls and messages, from Daniel, from employees seeking guidance, from board members offering support, and from clients who had somehow already caught wind that something significant had happened at Merck Logistics. Sipping coffee by the window overlooking Boston Harbor, I methodically sorted through the communications, prioritizing those that required immediate attention and delegating others to Vivian, who had set up a temporary command center in the adjacent hotel suite. Daniel's lawyer has requested an emergency meeting, Vivian reported, tablet in hand. They're claiming the board action was procedurally improper and threatening litigation if he's not reinstated immediately. I smiled faintly. Forward that to Sophia. She'll handle it. Also, Natalie Santiago has been trying to reach the office since 7 a.m. Apparently, her access to the project funds has been frozen, and she has contractors expecting payments today. That was a complication I hadn't fully anticipated. The Boston Modern Hotel project, despite its illegitimate funding, involved real commitments to third parties who had nothing to do with Daniel's deception. Schedule a meeting with her for this afternoon, I decided, and have Michael prepare a complete financial breakdown of the project. Legitimate expenses versus inflated ones, actual contractor commitments, potential return on investment if properly managed. Vivian nodded, making notes. What about the press? The Business Journal has already called twice, and Channel 5 left a message asking for comment on the executive shakeup at Merck Logistics. No comment for now. Have our PR team prepare a standard statement about leadership transitions and commitment to client service. Nothing specific until we've stabilized internally. My phone buzzed with another call from Daniel. This would be his 14th attempt since last night. I declined it and turned back to Vivian. What's on the agenda for today? You have the executive team meeting at 9 a.m., followed by the operations review at 11. Sophia wants to meet at lunch to discuss the divorce filing. Then Natalie Santiago at 2, and the property management company for your new condo at 4. I raised an eyebrow. New condo? Vivian smiled. Sophia suggested you might prefer not to return to the house you shared with Daniel. Her team located a suitable temporary residence, a penthouse in the Millennium Tower, available for immediate occupancy. 3-month minimum lease, furnished with appropriate security. I nodded appreciatively. Once again, Sophia had anticipated needs I hadn't yet articulated. Add it to the schedule. By 8:30, I was walking into Merck Logistics headquarters, dressed in a steel gray suit that projected calm authority. The office atmosphere was tense with speculation and uncertainty. Exactly what happened in a company when its CEO was abruptly removed. The executive team waited in the main conference room, their expressions ranging from nervous to curious. These were the people who would help me stabilize the company in the wake of Daniel's removal, or who would need to be replaced, if they couldn't adjust to the new reality. Good morning, I began, taking my seat at the head of the table, Daniel's former position. I know yesterday's events have created significant uncertainty, and I want to address that directly before we move forward. For the next hour, I outlined the situation in clear, unemotional terms. Daniel's financial improprieties had been discovered during routine reviews. The board had taken appropriate action based on documented evidence. I would be serving as interim CEO while we determined the best long-term leadership structure. Our priority was ensuring continuity for clients and employees. What about the rumors that this is connected to personal issues? Asked Kendra from marketing, carefully avoiding direct mention of the affair that was undoubtedly being discussed in every break room and Slack channel. Merck Logistics leadership changes are based solely on documented financial misconduct, I replied firmly. My personal relationship with Daniel is irrelevant to his removal as CEO and will be handled privately. The meeting continued with operational updates and immediate priorities. Most of the executive team seemed relieved rather than resistant to the change, suggesting that Daniel's leadership style had perhaps created more tension than I'd realized. As they filed out, Michael Chen lingered behind. There's something you should know, he said once we were alone. Daniel called me last night, trying to get me to release emergency funds to his personal account. When I refused, he implied I would regret choosing sides. I nodded, unsurprised. Thank you for telling me. We'll make sure you're protected, both professionally and personally. There's more, Michael continued, looking uncomfortable. He mentioned trying to access backup servers and financial records from home. I don't know if he succeeded, but we should assume he's gathering ammunition, I finished. Have IT conduct a complete security audit, lock down all financial systems with new protocols. And Michael? Document every communication from Daniel. Forward any threats directly to our legal team. The morning blurred into a series of meetings, decisions and strategic moves to secure Merck Logistics from both external speculation and internal disruption. By noon, we had implemented new financial controls, communicated with key clients to assure them of continuity, and begun the process of auditing every project Daniel had overseen. Lunch with Sophia took place in a private dining room at an upscale restaurant near the office. Security measures had been increased after Daniel's threatening behavior toward Michael, a precaution rather than an overreaction. The divorce filing is ready, Sophia announced, sliding a folder across the table. Given the documented financial misconduct and misappropriation of marital assets, we're in an extremely strong position. I reviewed the papers carefully. The terms were comprehensive. Full accounting of all diverted funds, return of misappropriated assets, significant penalties for the financial deceptions, and a complete separation that protected my interests in both personal property and business holdings. Daniel's attorney has been in contact, Sophia continued. They're posturing about challenging the share transfer and board action, but it's a weak position. What they really want is negotiation, to find terms that allow Daniel to save face and retain some connection to Merck Logistics. Not happening, I said firmly. The financial improprieties are too severe, and the breach of trust too complete. Sophia nodded approvingly. That's my recommendation as well. Sign now and we'll file immediately. Daniel will be served this afternoon. As I signed the divorce papers, I felt an odd mixture of finality and liberation. 15 years of marriage, ending with the stroke of a pen. Yet the signature also represented my refusal to be further victimized by Daniel's deceptions. One more thing, Sophia added as we concluded lunch. The forensic accountants have traced additional funds, approximately $85,000, that Daniel transferred to an offshore account last week. We're working to freeze those assets before he can access them. He's preparing to run, I realized. Or, at least creating escape hatches if things go badly for him here. Precisely, which is why we're moving quickly on all fronts. Back at the office, I prepared for what promised to be the most uncomfortable meeting of the day. Natalie Santiago. She arrived precisely at 2 p.m., escorted by reception to the main conference room where I waited with Michael and one of Sophia's associates. My first impression was one of calculation. Natalie had clearly chosen her outfit, conservative but fashionable. Expression, professional concern rather than personal distress. And opening position with care. Mrs. Mercer, she began, extending her hand with remarkable composure. Thank you for agreeing to meet. I understand there's been some confusion about the Boston Modern Hotel project funding. Confusion isn't the word I'd use, I replied, gesturing for her to sit. Systematic financial impropriety would be more accurate. Natalie maintained her professional demeanor, though her knuckles whitened as she gripped her portfolio. I've worked with Daniel, with Merck Logistics, on this project in good faith. I have contractors and vendors with approved invoices who are expecting payment today. Let's clarify something immediately, I said. You haven't been working with Merck Logistics. You've been working with Daniel Mercer personally, using funds he improperly diverted from both company accounts and our personal finances. Her composure slipped slightly. I was assured the project had proper corporate backing. By Daniel? The same person who assured you he was planning to leave his wife once the hotel deal was finalized? I asked, watching her reaction carefully. Flash of genuine surprise crossed her face. We never discussed. Ms. Santiago, Michael interjected gently. We've reviewed your project communications extensively. While the hotel concept itself shows promise, the funding mechanism was fundamentally illegitimate. Daniel Mercer did not have authority to commit Merck Logistics resources to this venture without board approval, which he never sought. Natalie's professional facade crumbled slightly. I had no idea the funding wasn't properly authorized. Daniel represented himself as having full discretionary control over investment decisions. A convenient assumption, I noted, especially given his marital status and the personal nature of your relationship. She straightened, regaining some composure. My personal relationship with Daniel has no bearing on the business merits of this project. On that point, we might actually agree, I conceded, nodding to Michael, who distributed documents to everyone at the table. What you're looking at, he explained, is our preliminary assessment of the Boston Modern Hotel project, separated from its illegitimate funding mechanism. The concept has merit. The market research is sound. The location is well chosen. Under different circumstances, it might even be the kind of diversification opportunity Merck Logistics would consider. Hope flickered across Natalie's face. Then, you'll continue the funding? No, I said firmly. The project is currently structured, with you as owner and developer funded by misappropriated Merck Logistics resources, is terminated effective immediately. Her expression fell, but I continued before she could protest. However, we are prepared to offer two alternatives. First, Merck Logistics could acquire the project entirely, including all intellectual property, permits, and contractor relationships, at fair market value as determined by independent appraisal. You would be bought out completely, with no ongoing involvement. And the second option? Natalie asked cautiously. The project could be restructured as a legitimate Merck Logistics subsidiary, with proper funding, board oversight, and transparent operations. You could potentially remain involved in a strictly professional capacity, reporting to our hospitality division head, a position that would be filled through proper recruitment, not personal relationship. Natalie considered this, her expression calculating. And if I decline both options, Michael responded this time, then Merck Logistics will initiate legal proceedings to recover all misappropriated funds. Given the documentation we possess, this would likely result in both civil and criminal investigations into the project's financing. The implication was clear. Natalie could either work with us on an appropriate resolution or face potential legal consequences as Daniel's accomplice in financial impropriety. I'll need time to consider these options, she said finally. You have 48 hours, I replied. In the meantime, we've established an escrow account to cover legitimate contractor commitments that can be documented with proper invoices. Michael? We'll work with you to verify these expenses and ensure no innocent third parties are harmed by this situation. As Natalie left, visibly shaken despite her attempts to maintain composure, I turned to Michael. What's your assessment? She's weighing her options, he replied, but I think she'll take the buyout. She strikes me as pragmatic enough to recognize when to cut her losses. I nodded in agreement. Have legal prepare both scenarios anyway, and make sure the independent appraisal is truly independent. No favoritism, but no punitive undervaluation either. This needs to be clean. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of operational decisions, client calls, and preparations for my temporary relocation to the Millennium Tower condo. By 6 p.m., as I was reviewing the day's developments with Vivian, security called to report a situation in the lobby. Daniel Mercer is demanding access, the head of security explained. He's become increasingly agitated and is threatening to call the police if we don't allow him upstairs. Has he been served with the divorce papers yet? I asked. Yes, about an hour ago, according to our information. That explained the timing. Maintain the access restriction, I instructed. If he continues to create a disturbance, escort him from the property. If he refuses to leave, then you can call the police. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Daniel, calling from the lobby. Against my better judgment, I answered. This isn't a good time, Daniel. Not a good time? He spat, his voice tight with fury. You lock me out of my own company, file for divorce, without so much as a conversation, freeze all our accounts, and it's not a good time? Any conversation we might have had should have occurred before you started embezzling company funds to finance your girlfriend's hotel and your affair. I replied calmly. Now it's in the hands of our respective attorneys. This is ridiculous, Daniel's voice rose. Everything I did was for us, for our future. The hotel project is a legitimate business opportunity that you were too risk-averse to appreciate. Is that what you told yourself while diverting $400,000 from the company, while draining our personal savings, while planning to push me out of Merck Logistics entirely? My voice remained steady despite the anger simmering beneath. The documentation tells a different story, Daniel. You're making a catastrophic mistake, he warned. I built Merck Logistics. The clients are loyal to me. The employees respect me. Without me, it all falls apart. That's a theory we're about to test, I replied. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a company to run. Please direct all further communication through your attorney. I ended the call as Daniel began another tirade, then turned to Vivian. Have security ensure he leaves the building. And let's accelerate the timeline on my move. To the Millennium Tower. I'd prefer not to have another confrontation at the house. Within hours, a professional moving team had retrieved essential items from my former home and transferred them to the furnished penthouse at Millennium Tower. The property management company had arranged everything from kitchen supplies to fresh flowers, creating an instant home that bore no trace of my life with Daniel. Standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, I felt an unexpected lightness. For 15 years, I'd shaped my life around our partnership, professional and personal. I'd attributed our success to our complementary strengths, Daniel's operational vision and my financial expertise. I'd believed we were building something together. Now, faced with the reality of his betrayal, I was discovering something surprising. I didn't need Daniel. Not professionally, not financially, not emotionally. The company was operating more efficiently under my interim leadership than it had in months. The financial controls Michael and I had implemented were already identifying additional irregularities that had escaped notice under Daniel's management. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. His attorney reached out. They want to discuss settlement terms. Desperation move. I smiled faintly. Daniel was discovering that his position was even weaker than he'd initially realized. With each passing day, more evidence of his financial misconduct emerged. Clients were responding positively to the leadership transition. Employees seemed relieved rather than resistant to the change. His carefully constructed world was collapsing, while mine was expanding in unexpected ways. 1 week after Daniel's removal, I called an all-hands meeting to address the company directly. The speculation and uncertainty had continued despite our best efforts at communication, and it was time to provide clarity. The company's main conference room couldn't accommodate all 50 employees, so we gathered in the building's atrium, a dramatic space with soaring ceilings and natural light that streamed through glass walls. I stood on a small platform, Michael and the executive team arrayed behind me in a show of unified leadership. Thank you all for coming, I began, looking out at the faces of people who had contributed to building Merck Logistics, many of whom I knew only peripherally through my previous advisory role. The past week has brought significant changes to our company, and you deserve to understand why. For the next 20 minutes, I provided a carefully calibrated explanation. Financial irregularities had been discovered during routine reviews. The board had taken appropriate action based on documented evidence. I would be serving as interim CEO while we determined the best long-term leadership structure. Our priority was ensuring stability for clients and employees. I avoided specific mention of Daniel's affair or the Boston Modern Hotel project, focusing instead on the company's future. The message was clear. Merck Logistics was moving forward with renewed commitment to ethical operations and transparent governance. Change is always challenging, I concluded, but it also creates opportunity. The strength of this company has never been any single individual. It's been the collective expertise, dedication, and integrity of everyone in this room. That hasn't changed, and it won't change moving forward. The response was cautiously positive. Relieved applause, thoughtful nods, a sense that the worst of the uncertainty had passed. As employees dispersed back to their departments, several approached me directly, expressing support or offering insights about operational improvements that had been overlooked under Daniel's leadership. By the time I returned to my office, formerly Daniel's, now transformed with subtle changes that made it distinctly mine, I felt a growing confidence that Merck Logistics would not only survive this transition, but potentially emerge stronger. Sophia was waiting for me, a satisfied expression on her, normally impassive face. Daniel's attorney called again. They've capitulated on almost every point of the divorce settlement. No more challenges to the share transfer, no claims against company resources, full acknowledgement of the financial improprieties. What changed? I asked, though I suspected the answer. The Boston Modern Hotel project, Sophia replied. Natalie Santiago accepted our buyout offer yesterday, but with an interesting twist. She provided complete documentation of her communications with Daniel, including texts and emails where he explicitly acknowledged that he was diverting company funds without authorization. I raised an eyebrow. Throwing him under the bus to save herself? Exactly. Once his attorney saw those materials, they realized their position was untenable. They're now focused solely on keeping Daniel out of criminal prosecution. It was a better outcome than I had anticipated. With Natalie's documentation supporting our existing evidence, Daniel had no choice but to accept the divorce terms as presented, including full financial restitution and complete separation from Merck Logistics. What happens now? I asked. We finalize the settlement, file the appropriate court documents, and close this chapter, Sophia said. Unless you've reconsidered pressing criminal charges? I thought about it carefully. The evidence would certainly support embezzlement charges against Daniel, potentially resulting in significant legal consequences. No, I decided finally. The complete professional and financial separation is sufficient. Criminal charges would extend the process and keep us tied to Daniel longer. I'd rather focus on rebuilding without him. Sophia nodded approvingly. That's my recommendation as well. Clean break, forward focus. She gathered her materials and stood to leave. By the way, the board has called a special meeting for Friday. Eleanor Winters mentioned they want to discuss the CEO position. The executive search firm hasn't even started the process, I pointed out. Sophia smiled knowingly. I don't think they're planning to look any further than the interim CEO who's been exceeding expectations for the past week. After she left, I sat at my desk now, not Daniel's, and reflected on how completely life could change in just 2 weeks. From trusted wife and behind-the-scenes financial architect to interim CEO and soon-to-be divorced woman building a new independent life, my phone buzzed with a text message. Daniel again, though the frequency of his attempted communications had decreased significantly as the reality of his situation sank in. I still don't understand how it came to this. Everything I did was for our future. I considered ignoring it, as I had his previous messages, but something prompted me to respond one final time. No, Daniel. Everything you did was for your future with Natalie, funded with my money and our company's resources. The difference matters. His reply came quickly. She betrayed me, handed over everything to save herself. After everything I sacrificed for her. The irony was almost painful. Then perhaps you understand how I felt discovering your betrayal. The difference is that I've built something stronger from the ruins. I put the phone down without waiting for his response and turned my attention to the operational review I'd been working on, a comprehensive assessment of Merck Logistics' structure, identifying opportunities for improvement that had been overlooked or deliberately ignored under Daniel's leadership. When my phone buzzed again, I expected another plea from Daniel. Instead, it was Eleanor Winters. Board meeting confirmed for Friday at 10 a.m. Agenda includes CEO position and expansion strategy. Your leadership these past days has impressed everyone. The company is finally realizing its full potential. I smiled at the validation, not of my capabilities, which I had never doubted, but of my vision for Merck Logistics. A vision that had always existed alongside Daniel's, but had been overshadowed by his more dominant presence. Now that vision would guide the company forward, shaped by my financial expertise and newly discovered leadership abilities. The betrayal that had seemed catastrophic 2 weeks ago had ultimately freed me to step fully into my potential, professionally and personally. Daniel had drained our savings for his girlfriend, but he had forgotten that I controlled his business shares. It was a mistake that had cost him everything he valued: his marriage, his company, his reputation, and ultimately, even the relationship he had sacrificed it all to pursue. As for me, I had lost a husband but found something far more valuable: the confidence to build a future entirely on my own terms, without compromise, without subordinating my goals to someone else's vision, without shrinking myself to accommodate another's ego. It wasn't the future I had planned. It was, potentially, something better. 3 months later, the transition was complete in every sense. The divorce was finalized, with Daniel accepting all financial penalties for his misconduct. The Boston Modern Hotel project had been restructured as a legitimate Merck Logistics subsidiary with proper funding and oversight. And the board had unanimously confirmed me as permanent CEO after a brief search that felt more like a formality than a genuine evaluation process. Daniel had relocated to Chicago, reportedly working for a small logistics firm in a mid-level position, the only role he could secure given the circumstances of his departure from Merck Logistics. Our paths no longer crossed, our lives entirely separate. Natalie Santiago had used her buyout money to start a hospitality consulting firm in Miami, as far from Boston and Daniel as she could reasonably get while remaining in the same industry as Z. For me, I had settled into my role as CEO with surprising ease, discovering leadership abilities that had always existed but rarely been exercised during my partnership with Daniel. Merck Logistics was thriving under the new management structure, with client retention at 100% and 3 major new accounts signed in the past month alone. My personal life had transformed as well. The temporary condo at Millennium Tower had become permanent, a space that reflected my tastes and priorities without compromise. I had reconnected with friends who had gradually fallen away during my marriage, rediscovered interests that had been set aside, and begun exploring a life defined by my own choices rather than our shared ones. One evening, as I was working late, in my office, Michael knocked on the door with the quarterly financial review. "The numbers are exceptional," he reported, handing me the report. "Revenue up 17% over this time last year, expenses down 12% with the new vendor management protocols, client satisfaction at record highs." I scanned the document, noting with satisfaction that every key metric had improved since I'd taken over leadership. And the hotel project? On track for next summer's opening. The revised business plan has attracted additional investment interest. It could become a significant revenue stream if we decide to expand the hospitality division. Michael hesitated, then added, "There's something else you should see." He handed me a business journal opened to a small article. The headline read, "Former Merck Logistics CEO joins regional competitor in advisory role." Daniel had apparently secured a position with one of our smaller competitors, not a significant threat, but a clear attempt to remain in the industry where he'd once been. A notable figure. I handed the journal back to Michael. "Good for him." "You're not concerned?" Michael asked, surprised by my nonchalance. "About Daniel?" "No." I closed the financial report and stood, gathering my things to leave. He'll always be trying to rebuild what he lost. I'm focused on creating something new. As we walked out together, Michael asked the question that had been on many people's minds during the transition. "Do you ever regret how things turned out? Not the professional part, but personally?" I considered this carefully as we waited for the elevator. I regret that the foundation of my marriage proved false. I regret the years spent with someone who ultimately betrayed my trust so completely. The elevator arrived and we stepped inside. "But I don't regret where it's led me," I continued. "Sometimes the worst betrayals create the strongest opportunities for growth." Daniel's actions forced me to recognize my own capabilities and value in ways I might never have discovered otherwise. Michael nodded thoughtfully as we reached the lobby. "Well, for what it's worth, the company is better for it. You were always the financial backbone, but now you're its heart and soul as well. As I left the building and walked toward my car, I reflected on his words. The financial backbone, the heart and soul. Roles I had earned through expertise and integrity, not taken through deception and manipulation. Daniel had drained our savings for his girlfriend, but he had forgotten that I controlled his business, shares. A simple oversight that had changed everything. For him, for me, for Merck Logistics. Some might call it karma. Others might see it as justice. I preferred to think of it as recalibration, the universe restoring balance by ensuring actions had their appropriate consequences. Whatever it was, I was grateful for the revelation, painful as it had been. It had freed me from a partnership built on sand and allowed me to rebuild on solid ground, this time with myself at the center of the blueprint. And that, ultimately, was worth far more than all the savings Daniel had drained or all the business, shares I now controlled. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up.